About 3 years ago, my partner and I bought our very first home. It was a modest place, nothing too fancy, but it was ours, and the neighborhood felt absolutely perfect. The people living around us were incredibly welcoming and kind, and for a while, life was genuinely good. It was so good, in fact, that about 18 months later, when our next-door neighbors told us they were planning to sell their house, we immediately got excited. Their place was much larger than ours, and it had all those extra luxuries we had been dreaming of, like a private driveway, a spacious garage, and a deep bathtub to relax in. We jumped at the chance, made an offer, and bought their house. Then we put our old house, which was now sitting right next door, up for sale. To make sure we chose the right people to move in, we asked potential buyers to send us motivation letters. After reading through several of them, we decided to sell to a Polish couple who seemed like a great fit. When we met them, they only spoke to us in English, never in Dutch like we did, but everything about them seemed perfectly normal. They asked us for a few tips about the house, and we had some pleasant, light-hearted small talk on the driveway. But looking back at those early days, I realize now that it was just the quiet before the storm. Even before the major incidents started happening, things just felt slightly off. We began to experience these highly bizarre disturbances at the strangest hours of the night. Sometimes, right around midnight, we would hear this heavy, aggressive banging, or incredibly loud music would start blasting through the shared walls without any warning at all. It was not a constant daily occurrence, but it happened enough to make us feel uneasy, like we did not truly know who was living just a few feet away from where we slept. The first real red flag appeared when the husband came home one afternoon with severe, deep damage along both sides of his car. It looked exactly like he had scraped against a metal guardrail at high speed on both the driver's side and the passenger side. When we saw the damage and asked him what had happened, he gave us a very clumsy, confusing excuse. He claimed that a concrete pole had scraped him on one side, and then a trailer taking a turn too wide had hit him on the other side. We chose to believe him at the time, mostly to keep the peace, even though the physical reality of the extreme damage and the math in our heads did not add up at all. Then one evening around 6 p.m, my phone rang. It was the neighbor, and he was in a state of absolute, total panic. He was practically screaming, claiming that there were strange people outside his house, turning his security cameras away. He begged us to go look outside and to call the police immediately. We looked out our window, and sure enough, we saw two strange men actively trying to break into his house. I called the emergency line right away. But the problem was, it took the police 20 minutes to arrive at our street, so by the time they pulled up, the burglars were already long gone. Right after the police arrived, the neighbor's wife came racing down the street in her car, parked it haphazardly, and frantically ran inside to check on her sweet little French bulldog and to talk to the officers who were already examining the scene. Around that same time, I decided to walk my own dog nearby out of curiosity. As I was walking down the block, I saw the husband parking his car 3 streets away from his own house and walking back toward the scene on foot. It looked exactly like he was trying to hide his vehicle from the police, but honestly, that highly suspicious thought did not fully register in my mind at the moment. Later that night, when we checked our own video doorbell footage, we saw the burglars standing in front of the house before the break-in, calmly discussing which specific property to target in Polish. Oddly enough, nothing was stolen from the house, and no one was caught. I told the police officers that the whole thing felt like a planned setup, but I never heard back from them. Fast forward to a week later, and I was attending a friend's housewarming party when my partner sent me a text message. He said the music next door was blasting insanely loud again. A few minutes later, he called me, and his entire tone had completely changed to pure, unadulterated terror. He told me that the neighbor's car had just come tearing through our front garden, destroying the grass, and had slammed directly into the neighbor's own front door. 2 men were now frantically loading the back of the car with high-end electronics, giant flat-screen televisions, professional music speakers, and other highly expensive electronic gear. They looked exactly like the same men we had seen trying to break in the week before. This time, the police were a lot quicker. They arrived on our street in exactly 7 minutes. The officers managed to intercept the men while they were still actively loading the heavy gear into the car. When the police asked them for identification, the men claimed they did not have any on them. And then, things got incredibly surreal. The man sitting behind the steering wheel looked the police officer straight in the eye and claimed to be my neighbor, using my neighbor's actual first and last name. But there was a major catch. In the 9 months that they had lived next door to us, my neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch to us. This man behind the wheel, however, spoke completely fluent Dutch with a thick Polish accent. Realizing their cover was totally blown, the men slammed the car into gear, and a violent, chaotic pursuit began right through our quiet, narrow suburban streets until the police finally managed to box their vehicle in and arrest them. But back at our house, the chaos was not over. My partner could still hear strange movements coming from inside our neighbor's home. The police went back inside the house, with their guns drawn, and dragged out a third suspect who had been hiding in the shadows. As my partner and I were standing inside our own home, with an officer to officially report the heavy damage to our front garden, our doorbell suddenly rang. We turned around and opened the door, and there he was, our actual neighbor. But he was completely unrecognizable. His face was a swollen, bloody, horrific mess. One of his eyes was swollen completely shut, his mouth was badly torn, and his arm hung at a useless, awkward angle, covered in what looked like painful defensive stab wounds. He looked completely feral, aggressive, and broken. The police officer tried to step in and help him, but the neighbor flat out refused to file a report or cooperate with the police in any way. Since the obvious victim of a violent crime refused to speak or say what had happened, the officer had no choice but to let him walk back to his own house. Later that night, the neighbor rang our doorbell again. He was trembling from head to toe. He broke down and confessed to us that he had been cheating on his wife, and he claimed that she had hired these people to completely take him out. He begged us to let him sleep at our house for the night. Terrified of getting dragged into this dangerous underworld drama, we refused to let him inside. Instead, my partner offered to drive him straight to the hospital. We dropped him off at the emergency room around 10:30 that night, telling him we were going to stay at a hotel because we no longer felt safe in our own home. But we did not actually go to a hotel. We went right back to our house, locked every single door and window, and tried to quiet our breathing. At around 1 in the morning, our dog suddenly let out a low, vibrating growl. It was a very specific growl he only used when someone was actively standing at our front door. We nervously checked the live feed of our doorbell camera, and there he was. The neighbor was back from the hospital, standing right on our porch, aggressively ringing the doorbell over and over again. We sat there in the absolute dark, watching the glowing screen in complete silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, we saw headlights turn onto our quiet street. The neighbor immediately panicked. He scrambled off our porch and ran to hide behind our parked cars in the driveway, crouching down in the dark shadows, watching this bloodied, broken, desperate man lurking in the darkness behind our own family vehicles was one of the most deeply unsettling things I have ever witnessed in my entire life. The car pulled up and stopped, and a woman stepped out. It was his wife. She walked slowly toward her own front door, then paused, and glanced over at our driveway. She spotted him hiding there. We held our breath, waiting for a violent confrontation, or something even worse to happen right in front of us. But instead, she just walked slowly toward him. As she stepped into the pale yellow glow of the street lamp, she suddenly began to wail. It was a haunting, guttural, heartbroken crying sound that echoed through the empty night. He did not say a single word to her. She kept sobbing and asking him questions, her voice getting louder and louder, bouncing off the silent houses. Eventually, they both got into her car and drove away into the night. We did not see either of them again for 3 whole days. We did not even know where their dog had been left. The wife eventually returned to the house completely alone. She found the sweet French bulldog left inside, and she quietly told us that she did not think she would ever see her husband again. Whatever the real dark story was behind all of this, whether it was drugs, heavy debts, or a marriage that had turned completely lethal, I realized one important thing. I do not think I ever want to know the truth. And then, there are those situations where the danger is not a chaotic neighbor, but someone completely silent, someone you cannot even see, who is watching your every move. This second story started back in the year 2017, when my family and I moved into a new split-level home in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Montreal, Canada. I was living there peacefully with my parents and my younger sister. Before I get into the truly terrifying part of this experience, I need to describe the layout of my bedroom and where it was located in the house, because this detail is incredibly important for understanding exactly how everything unfolded from my point of view. The house we bought was a split level, meaning the different floors were staggered and connected by very short flights of stairs. My bedroom was not on the main, upper floor, and it was not down in the basement either. It sat exactly in the middle of those two levels, right at the ground level of the house. One wall of my bedroom shared a direct partition with our garage, and the opposite wall had a very large, wide window that looked directly out into our dark backyard. At the time, that window was covered by cheap, plastic vertical blinds that were missing several panels. Because of those missing pieces, even when the blinds were fully closed, there were wide open gaps that allowed me to clearly see outside into the yard. To make things even more intense, on the garage side of my room sat my closet, which had these massive, sliding mirror doors. This meant that whenever I was lying in my bed, no matter which side I turned to face, I could always see the reflection of my backyard window staring right back at me in the glass of the closet doors. I first started noticing that something was wrong about a year after we moved in, right when I turned 15. I remember lying in bed late at night, watching YouTube videos on my tablet, because I always had a really hard time falling asleep. One warm night, I heard a strange noise coming from just outside my window. I had left the window open a few inches because it was incredibly hot in my room, and we had not installed an air conditioning unit yet, so I had to rely on whatever outdoor breeze I could get. After hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps or some sort of shuffling on the grass, I quickly paused my video and set my tablet down on the mattress. The moment I paused the video, the noise stopped, which made me think that it had just been a sound effect from the video I was watching, or maybe just my hyperactive imagination. I resumed the video, and a few minutes later, I heard the exact same shuffling sound again. I looked over to my left, staring directly toward the window gaps, but I could not see anything out there in the dark. Eventually, I brushed it off and fell asleep. For the next few nights, everything was completely silent. But then, a couple of nights later, during my usual late-night routine, I heard the shuffling noise return. I paused my screen again and listened intently, holding my breath. This time, I listened much longer than before, and I swear I could hear the sound of slow, heavy breathing coming from right outside the screen. I glanced over at the window, but once again, there was absolutely nothing visible. I tried to convince myself that my mind was just playing tricks on me because I was tired, so I rolled over to face away from the window, looking toward my closet mirrors instead. As I picked my tablet back up to hit play, I saw something move in the reflection of the mirror. It was a movement right behind one of the open gaps in my window blinds. A cold chill ran straight down my spine. I got out of bed immediately, ran upstairs, and woke up my parents, figuring it was much better to be safe than sorry. I told them exactly what I had seen and heard. My dad clearly doubted me, thinking I was just being paranoid, but he grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check the entire backyard anyway. A few minutes later, he came back inside and told me he had searched every single corner of the yard and found absolutely nothing. He explained to me that if an actual person had been out there, he would have easily heard them opening our loud, squeaky side gate, or at least heard them running away. He even checked our front ring camera, which showed no motion and no one walking around the sides of the house toward the back. I suggested that the person could have simply jumped over the wooden fence into our neighbor's yard to escape. But my dad quickly shut that idea down. He told me we lived in an incredibly safe neighborhood, and that I just needed to stop watching so many scary movies. Unfortunately, I chose to believe him, and I went back to sleep. But the problem was, every couple of weeks or months after that night, I would hear those same unsettling noises again. Each time it happened, I forced myself to believe it was just in my head, and I would try to focus entirely on my videos or force myself to fall asleep. When the winter months arrived and the ground was completely covered in thick snow, the noises stopped entirely, and I eventually forgot all about it. But the following spring, it started all over again. It did not happen constantly, maybe only once or twice a month at the very most, and it was always well past 11 o'clock at night. I did my absolute best to ignore it, even when the noises were clearly the heavy footsteps of a person or deep rhythmic breathing right outside the glass. I watched a lot of horror films, so I kept telling myself that my imagination was just overactive. I stopped looking at the window completely, because a part of me was absolutely terrified of being proven right. Then one night, against my own better judgment, I looked. I did not look directly at the window because that was far too scary. Instead, I looked at the sliding mirror doors. In the reflection, I swear I saw the distinct silhouette of a large person standing perfectly still. I ran upstairs to my parents again, and once again, after checking the yard, my dad told me the exact same thing. He said there was no one there, and once again, I chose to believe him because the alternative was too terrifying to handle. This cycle went on for a very long time. I started going to bed earlier, playing my videos at a higher volume, wearing headphones, and completely avoiding looking at the mirror or looking directly at my window. The terrifying occurrences always stopped when the weather turned freezing cold, and they always resumed in the middle of spring. Fast forward to a night in early December of the year 2021. There was a massive, violent windstorm hitting our area. I was watching a stream with my boyfriend over Discord when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30 at night. On my way, I noticed my parents sitting in the living room. It caught me off guard since they rarely stayed up that late, let alone outside their bedroom. Their faces looked tense and preoccupied. I asked if everything was okay, but they brushed it off, assuring me it was nothing. I assumed I had walked in on a conversation not meant for my ears and headed back toward my room. As I turned toward the stairs, flashes of red and blue light caught my attention through the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents immediately stood up as if they had been expecting it, and they quickly rushed me down the short flight of stairs to my room, telling me they would call me if they needed anything. I wanted answers, but I knew it was not time to push. So I went back to my room, curiosity eating away at me. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. This time they did not keep me in the dark. My dad explained that about 15 to 20 minutes earlier, during the windstorm, he had stepped into the backyard to make sure nothing had been blown over before going to bed. While scanning the yard, he noticed the light from my bedroom window illuminating something near it. As his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a man standing motionless just outside my window, staring inside. My dad yelled at him and started moving toward him, but the man immediately turned and ran, jumping the back fence effortlessly as if he had done it 100 times before, and he disappeared into the neighboring yards. In that moment, everything I had feared for years stopped being a possibility and became a fact. I had not imagined it. Someone really had been there. Terrified, my parents called the police right away, and then went to knock on the neighbor's door to warn her. The older woman who lived there did not open the door. Instead, she yelled at them to leave, or she would call the cops herself. The police eventually arrived, but since my dad had not gotten a clear look at the man, there was not much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area, and recommending we install more cameras, which we did. In retrospect, my back neighbor's reaction still feels deeply suspicious to me. Why was her first response to threaten my parents when all they did was knock on her door to warn her? It raises a couple questions, such as, was she living with that man my dad saw, or had she seen him too, and genuinely thought it was him knocking? Did I know the person who stood outside my window for years, or was it just some creepy neighbor who noticed a teenage girl's room with poorly covered blinds and took advantage of it? Did he only want to watch, or was he working up to something else? Even now, those questions haunt me. Knowing that someone was really there the entire time makes every sound I brushed off, every breath I thought I imagined, and every silhouette I forced myself not to look at, feel so much more terrifying. I have since switched rooms and cannot look at windows facing our backyard the same way anymore. Thank God mine now faces the street. What scares me the most is not that it happened, but how long it went on for without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued. It was a cold winter day in mid-December, and I was 15 years old. I originally lived in a suburban area of Alberta with my parents in our apartment. However, we were running low on space, and with my little sister on her way, we knew we had to move to a bigger house. It seemed lucky for us at first because there was a house just a few blocks down that was selling for a very cheap price tag. Granted, it was not the best looking house on the block or in the safest area, but it had plenty of room to grow in, and for the price we paid, we could renovate to our heart's content. My dad did renovate slightly with the small amount of money we had left, but mainly focused on the basement as it was almost unusable without being fixed up first. He did a lot of cleaning, carpeting, adding new beams, fixing the bathroom, and putting up fresh wallpaper with a cool pattern I got to choose myself. For the first couple of months, living there had been great, and I was really enjoying the new house until the first questionable moment came along. It was my father's birthday, and to celebrate, we all had gone to a restaurant in the evening. All went well until we came home to our front door wide open. My mom was absolutely shaken, and we begged my dad to drive us away from the house while she called the police. My dad grabbed a large, heavy wrench from his toolbox in the truck and went into the house to search for the intruder. My mom and I called the cops anyway, and we sat there for 5 excruciatingly long minutes before they arrived. They searched the house and found my dad, and he came back out and told us nothing was actually stolen, and no one was in the house either. However, some of our items were moved or knocked over, specifically the books on my bookshelf. The police eventually finished their search and told us the same thing. We were still a little paranoid, but finally we went inside our home. From that day forward, I would always hear strange noises coming from the walls, and sometimes underneath our basement. Might I add, my room was there in the basement, but I always dismissed the sounds as the pipes. This was an older house after all. That was until one night something unexplainable happened. It was around 2 in the morning and I was playing with my Nintendo DS under the sheets with no volume, so my parents did not know I was still awake. That is when I heard it. Clear laughter coming from the wall to the side of my bed. My heart froze completely in time and my eyes probably widened to the size of dinner plates. I did not know what I should do. Should I ignore it, call my parents, or go investigate? I decided to wait for a while to see if it happened again. But after about 30 minutes of laying still as a stone, I decided it must have just been my sleep-deprived imagination, and finally went to sleep. I woke up the next morning in my bed as usual. Nothing changed. Despite that laugh still burning in my mind, I tried to pass it off. I would still hear the same strange noises every so often for the next couple of weeks, but that felt normal for me. Now, this is when the next occurrence happens. By this time my sister was already born, and since the basement was big enough, plus my mom trusted me with keeping her safe at night, she shared the room with me. Now this does not mean my mom did not use baby monitors, because she did. She kept the parent units in the living room and the other in the kitchen. One night, my parents had gone out for a late-night dinner and left me to take care of the house until they got back. I was in the living room watching a movie when I got up to get a snack from the kitchen. That is when I noticed odd noises coming from the baby monitor, and my heart sank. I knew no one else was home, but those were footsteps. Loud, heavy footsteps. Suddenly, my fear was realized when my sister started crying, and I heard a faint shushing sound come out of the speaker, followed by a crash. I instantly did the first thing that came to mind, which now, thinking clearly in retrospect, could have gotten us both killed. I ran as quickly as I could up to my parents' room and grabbed my father's rifle. However, I did not have the key to unlock the trigger lock or any of the ammunition. I figured I would pretend it was loaded and try to hide the lock with my hand. If I was attacked, I would use the buttstock to defend myself. All I thought of was getting my sister to safety. When I got to the basement door, I opened it quietly and walked down the steps, turning to face my sister's crib. No one was there, but she was still crying, as well as the baby monitor being on the ground sideways. I mustered all the courage I could and yelled that I was armed and they should come out before I find them. Still nothing. I grabbed my sister and ran upstairs. I closed the basement door and pushed a chair under the handle to keep it locked while I called my parents. They called the police and got home as fast as they could. The police got to my house before my parents did, so they made me sit safely in the back of the warm cop car with my baby sister while one of the police officers went inside to investigate. When my parents arrived, I told them everything that happened. They were confused but very concerned. They knew I was not the type of kid that would lie about something like this. The police officer came out and gave us an all clear and said no one was in the house. Just as they finished talking to us and were about to leave, my dad worriedly asked them if they checked behind the bookshelf. In my room, there was a bookshelf that came embedded into the wall. So, I was very confused when my dad asked to look behind it. The police officer was confused too, and asked my father to come inside with him and point out what he meant. Lo and behold, when we got downstairs, my bookshelf was pushed open slightly like a door, and the basement window that leads to the backyard was opened all the way with my desk chair planted under it. Behind the bookshelf was a small room with some of the pipes to our house, and the pipes wrapped around some of the walls. On the ground of that crawl space were several empty food wrappers, one of our favorite cups that had gone missing, a bottle of lotion, a sharp metal switchblade, along with a red apple that was partially eaten but still slightly fresh. Someone had been living in our house, and we did not even know it this whole time. The police said that most likely while they were outside talking to us, whoever was here escaped through the open window. They said to call if we ever noticed anything suspicious. However, they did not think the person would come back now that we knew of their secret. That was not even the most horrifying part, however. A few days later, I pushed open the bookshelf myself and explored it top to bottom. That is when I found a tiny hole in the wall, and when I looked through, it pointed directly to my bed and dresser. Whoever was in there was watching me sleep, get dressed, play my video games, do my homework, speak on the phone, everything. They knew most of my life. I am an adult now, and I live in my own apartment with my boyfriend. My parents still live there 5 years later. To this day, I worry for them, and hope whoever that was never returns. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.